What's going on, you guys? It is your boy, the American F1 fan, Eric Ringel here, and it is time for the FINal Lap Podcast after the Japanese Grand Prix. And what an event this was this morning at midnight in the United States. If you were up late last night, it was 3 o'clock when that race ended, but I think there is so much to talk about throughout the entire weekend. And just in general, from, a perspective of a Formula One fan, I guess congratulations to Max Verstappen on his second World Drivers' Championship. But I think we're going to get into it in this episode that there are some massive issues, again, that are going to cloud a second World Drivers' Championship by Max Verstappen. But let's get on into the race weekend. So, as we began early in the weekend, it was quite the eventful one, as we had two drivers sign contracts with new teams, as Pierre Gasly has gone to Alpine Racing, and Nick De Vries finally enters Formula One, and he is going to be driving for AlphaTauri in 2023. And I mentioned in the short that I posted on the channel, on my YouTube channel, about the fact that, it's going to be very interesting to see how Pierre Gasly and, Esteban Ocon are going to be able to get along. As we've heard, there have been rumors. Now, no one's ever discussed, what exactly the issues are to why they're not friends anymore. But, it's going to be an interesting dynamic going into 2023 to see how well they are going to be able to drive as teammates next season. I think it's going to be quite juicy. I'm hoping, we're never going to know what the issues were that, caused them to have their falling out or, whatever the case may be. So it's going to be one of those ones we're just going to have to sit here, I think, and guess and whatnot. But I think this is a great move for Alpine, especially losing Alonso to Aston Martin. You needed a guy that has a lot of talent, has been in Formula One for a while now. I just don't think that, the name Jack Doohan was getting thrown around a lot, who's in Formula 2 right now. His name was getting thrown a lot as a potential, person to fill in that spot, but I don't know if they thought Esteban Ocon was ready to lead a team and to, basically lead a rookie, into the 2023 season. So I think Pierre Gasly was probably the better move in the long run. And then when you look at AlphaTauri and Nick De Vries getting there, it was long overdue for Nick to be in Formula One. He's a champion in Formula E. Has, shown that he can definitely hang with the big boys, especially in Italy when he drove at Monza, was able to, drag a Williams car that is arguably last on the grid as far as a car goes, and was able to drag that into the top 10 and beat basically Nicholas Latifi, who's been with that team now for, almost 3 years. Like, that was just a sign of that it was time for, obviously somebody else to, for Williams, for somebody else to come in. But I think it just shows the talent that Nick De Vries has. And AlphaTauri gets a driver, I think who can legitimately lead that, can really put that team on his back, because Yuki's just not shown that he can definitely be a leader yet in Formula One. And, Nick De Vries is a guy who's been a number one driver in Formula E and in other feeder series. So I think this was a great signing for AlphaTauri. But now that leads to only 2 seats being left remaining in the driver's lineup for 2023. You've got Haas and Williams, who have not yet named their second driver for the 2023 season. There's been rumors that it may be Daniel Ricciardo, but even Daniel came out later this week and said, it doesn't look like I'm going to be on the grid for 2023. So it sounds like Haas isn't going to be looking at Daniel Ricciardo, or maybe Daniel's not looking at Haas. So it looks like Daniel may not be on the grid for next season. Haas has been in talks apparently with Nico Hulkenberg. Really that's been the only name bandied around. You've got Antonio Giovinazzi, but I think that's a big, nothing sandwich. I mean, Antonio just hasn't, put up put up the results that would lead you to believe he deserves a drive in Formula One again, especially after what he did at Alfa Romeo the past 2 seasons, and just not being able to, live up to the hype that, a Ferrari junior driver was expected to give. So moving on, let's move on from driver lineups in 2023. We move into the race weekend, and it was, so going into free practice 1 and free practice 2, on Thursday night into Friday early morning, the rain was the big story in Japan. It was pouring buckets. If you watched free practice 1, it was an absolute nightmare. But I think this was the session that really a lot of the teams got a lot of really good running in the rain, which I think set them up for the race earlier this morning. But you were starting to see what teams were going to be able to race well in the wet. Unfortunately for Haas, Mick Schumacher decided to wreck his car during the cool-down lap after practice had ended. So he missed out on free practice 2. And again, this is going to the reason why it doesn't look like Haas is going to re-sign Mick Schumacher for 2023. Just silly mistakes like this that cost the team money and hurts the team when it comes to the cost cap. It's quite frustrating. And let's get on into, so we're going to talk a little bit, I know we're talking a little bit about the weekend, but I'm going to jump back a little bit to the FIA and let's talk about the comedic errors that we saw from FIA this weekend, or this whole week in general. So the FIA was supposed to come out with their financial report for each of the teams to let us know, if there were any teams that breached the cost cap for 2021. It was supposed to come out on Wednesday. The FIA announces that they're going to delay the report till this coming Monday. And I think this is the first in a long list of just, the FIA is not helping themselves when it comes to, the talks of, F1 fans and, the people that are haters against Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton or whatever case may be. It's one of those things that I think it just does not help the already sullied, not personality, but the thought of the FIA. And, there's a lot of, and it's already, again, we talked about it last week, more and more conspiracy theories. Obviously people are saying, there have been rumors that, Red Bull and Aston Martin broke cost cap as of last year. If they broke the cost cap, that could potentially lead to certain punishments. Potentially losing championships, constructors championships, point deductions. You name it. There's a lot of different potentials for penalties to come to those teams, depending on how bad they broke the cost cap for 2021. But again, I go back to the fact that the FIA is just not, they're not endearing themselves to the fans. We obviously had a huge issue with Michael Massey last season and some of the choices that he made. We even saw it last week when they decided that, they weren't going to race in wet weather. And then this weekend, I think more comedic errors happened. We got into qualifying. Max Verstappen literally swerved into the way of Lando Norris during a qualifying session. Pushed Lando Norris off the road. Like, literally pushed him off the road just a little bit after 130R. And literally all Max gets is a reprimand. Not a grid penalty, not a, time penalty or, disqualification, nothing. Just a, hey, don't do it again, please, if you wouldn't mind. And how does the FIA go from, caring about driver safety, the weekend before and not allowing them to race when it came to, driving in the wet weather in Singapore and, driver safety, quoting driver safety there. But then you have Max Verstappen who shows, no common courtesy or care for what he's doing, and literally this could have turned out to be god awful had Lando Norris had an accident here, and I guess maybe that's the only reason why they didn't penalize Max on this, but like, that's a joke. You have penalized other drivers in the past for blocking, for, erratic driving during qualifying, for not staying to the delta that you need to during qualifying. How do you not penalize Max Verstappen in this instance? Again, goes back to the FIA and the stewards and says, what are you guys doing? Like, you're making decisions that are making people question what your motives truly are. And I don't want Formula One to fall into this, this thing of, we've got to question the FIA's every single move, but like, just over this last week, you've got to over the last 2 weeks, really, you've got to question exactly what the FIA is thinking, and it's just, it's detrimental to the sport. And I don't know what the right solution is at this point, because we're getting to a point in time where the FIA is going to be, you're going to have to come up with a decision. Do you just want stewards, or do you just want, a massive, control center, and just have, a whole team of people stewarding a race, or, stewarding qualifying, or, whatever the case may be, because people are starting to lose faith in Freitas and the group that Suleiman brought in for 2022. People have lost absolute confidence in these guys that they can, lead races and be able to steward races and not look like it's being, controversial, or, that it may be leaning towards one driver or the other. I mean, we get it. Max is probably winning the championship this year, but it looks very fishy when you don't penalize Max Verstappen for such erratic driving that could have caused a horrible accident and gotten Lando Norris injured. So then obviously we're talking about qualifying. Max Verstappen qualifies on pole. Charles Leclerc qualifies second. This was one of those, it was so close. The qualifying was so good. Like, literally the field spread in Q1 was like 1.2 seconds between first and last. Like, that is exactly what Formula One was wanting when they brought in these regulations. That they wanted such a close field spread that, this was exactly what they wanted. And then you got into Q2, you started to see a little bit more field spread between, the top 10 and the bottom 5 that ended up falling out of Q2. And then Q1, the cars got even faster and faster, and, Charles just wasn't able to beat Max Verstappen. So Max starts on pole for Sunday's race, and this is, again, another one of those situations where I think the FIA could have stepped in on the race on Sunday, because you see it later on with what I'm going to discuss. But, so we get to race day. It's pouring down rain. All the cars are starting on the intermediate tires. Nobody's starting on the wets. And I mean, it's just chucking it down. I mean, it just, like, you can see the puddles starting to form pretty badly. And as we start at the start of the race, Max gets a really horrible getaway. Charles, gets a really great start, but then I guess just got really hesitant on the brakes and broke a little bit too early, and Max was able to stay in the lead. But further on back in the field, Sebastian Vettel makes contact with Fernando Alonso, spins him out. Then you have Carlos Sainz, who hydroplanes across the track once you get past the Degna 1 and Degna 2 and going into the hairpin. He spins out, ends up wrecking his race. Pierre Gasly ends up with a portion of the Rolex board on his car he couldn't see. So he had to go to the pits to change for damage. But here's the the biggest thing is, so after the safety car comes out for the Carlos Sainz crash, the FIA inexplicably decides to bring out a crane. And of all tracks for this to have happened at, I don't think the irony is lost on a lot of people, but the FIA deciding to bring out the crane to move Carlos Sainz's car under the safety car. Now remember, I've just mentioned that Pierre Gasly has pitted to fix some of the damage that had occurred to his car. Well, now he's trying to catch back up to the field, and I mean, he's going faster. Now, he's readily admitted on Twitter that he was probably going a little bit faster than he should, but the crane was already on the track during the safety car. In the wet weather. Do we not remember Jules Bianchi back in 2014? I mean, all it takes, and especially because we saw Carlos Sainz literally hydroplane across the track and lose all control, this very easily could have happened to Pierre Gasly or anybody else under the safety car, even if you're only moving, 50, 60 miles an hour. Somebody could have hydroplaned, and that could have killed somebody. And the FIA, to be that dumb and to put a crane out on the track, is absolutely asinine. And this goes to another decision that the FIA has made that makes you question what the heck is going on up there. Because then they broadcast the announcement that they're going to check in, or they're going to investigate Pierre Gasly for the red flag incident, and this basically goes to him, trying to catch up to the field. And at the end of the race, they penalized Pierre Gasly 20 seconds for supposedly speeding under the red flags. When, if you look, he literally was trying to catch up to the field, but the crane shouldn't have been there. The crane should have never been on the track until that red flag was thrown. The fact that they even knew that the red flag was going to be a potential here, they should have thrown it immediately, because they knew the crane was going to be needed to get that car off the track. And the FIA and Formula One are extremely lucky this morning that somebody didn't have an accident and potentially get killed by slamming into the back of that tractor after 2014. It goes to another, dumb decision. But, then it starts raining, and we're waiting, and obviously the 3-hour time clock has started since the race has started. And this is another one of those rules I think that needs to be changed. I think that Formula One needs to complete a whole race no matter what. No 3-hour time limits, no 2-hour time limits. I just think you need to be able to finish the race when, at absolutely all costs, unless obviously it's dark and a track doesn't have lighting, then obviously that's a little bit different. But there doesn't need to be time limits when it comes to, trying to finish a race on time. If you're that worried about time limits, start the race a little bit sooner. Start it a little bit earlier in the day, so that you're not running into, situations like that where, you're running into not running a full race, but running into, a timed race. So then, while we're sitting under the red flag, then we get the message that they're going to eventually go back racing, but that wet racing tires are going to be mandatory. Now, I thought to myself, and I was sitting there in my mind, and I'm glad that they're going to try to go back racing with wet weather tires on, because I think they heard enough of the criticism last week in Singapore, where it didn't seem to be raining as bad in Singapore as it was in Japan, but they decided not to go racing there. So bringing making the wet tire mandatory, good decision here. But I guess my question is looking back to the beginning of the race and seeing the radar and how bad the track was looking. Why didn't you make the wet weather tires mandatory at the beginning of the race? Because just looking at the start of the race, a lot of guys were complaining of hydroplaning on those intermediate tires. The intermediate tires don't have as much tread and as much deep tread as those wet weather tires are. And you feel like you would get more grip with the absolute wet weather tires. So I guess I questioned why the FIA didn't make the wet tires mandatory at the beginning of the race as well, with all the standing water that they were seeing all throughout the weekend when it would rain. Like, why don't we just go ahead and start on the wet weather tires if you're wanting to go ahead and start the race? But so be it. They make the right decision when they're going to come back to green flag racing, that let's start on the wet weather tires. Another good decision, they start with a rolling start. Obviously, with all the standing water on the track, if you try to do a standing start after a red flag, it was gonna be a bit of chaos and calamity, I think, had you tried to do that. So they did the rolling start. Max gets again out to a great lead. Charles just had nothing there. Complaining at tires. Then everybody pits, and I think the Haas did a great picture of this morning. It looked so good while it lasted. It was everybody was pitting when the rain finally stopped, and like the water was finally getting run off the track from all the running. Everybody started switching over to the intermediates, and it left Mick Schumacher in first place in a Haas. And I think I was quite excited to see this just for a little bit, but obviously with everybody switching over to the intermediates and the wet weather tires no longer being the tire to be on in the wets, Mick just literally dropped down the order. Haas was hoping maybe for a safety car, I think, here, to potentially pit him and, not, get penalized so much, but that ends up not happening. He drops all the way to the back of the field. But I think the great battle on track was between, you had two really good battles. It was Lewis Hamilton and Esteban Ocon for 4th and 5th. And then obviously Charles Leclerc and Sergio Perez for 2nd and 3rd. Now, so Lewis just couldn't get by Esteban. It was just amazing that Esteban did such an amazing job in being able to defend 4th place from Lewis Hamilton. Obviously, you can see that the Mercedes has a speed disadvantage when it comes to Alpine. Just wasn't able, he would be able to get close when he was in Esteban's slipstream, but then once he pulled out, Esteban would start to pull away. And so you can see the difference in speeds between Alpine and the Mercedes. And, Lewis just wasn't able to, get past Esteban. And then I think the much better fight, which I congratulations to the FIA for finally getting it right when you're covering the race of, covering the right fights in the field. They covered the Sergio Perez Charles Leclerc fight all the way to the very end. And I think my thing is, so we get to the very last lap of the race. They're fighting, Sergio has been trying all, the last 10 laps since he had gotten caught up to Charles. He had been trying to get past him, and Charles was just running a much better line throughout certain corners. And you could see the difference in the grip of the track that when Charles was running those different lines. But then coming down to the very last lap, you're going into the last chicane before the start-finish straight to finish the race. And, Charles outbrakes himself. I mean, it's as simple as that. Charles outbroke himself. And and runs straight on at the chicane, and does his best to not try to just basically blow the corner completely out, but he tries to get back on track as soon as possible, and then does a really good job of kind of letting the car steer on its own, and kind of got in Sergio's way. Didn't push him off here by any stretch. I mean, we've seen much worse, so I wouldn't have understood if they had thrown a penalty there. But then we get the note that they're going to investigate Charles Leclerc for cutting a corner and gaining an advantage, after the race. So the investigation happens, and very quickly, I might add, very quickly after the race, they penalized Charles Leclerc 5 seconds, moving Sergio Perez up into second place. But then inexplicably, the FIA decides to issue full points for this race, as compared to the points the way the rules stated. They gave full points for this race and give Max Verstappen the Drivers' Championship today by using the wrong list of points for a race that's just past the 50% mark. And on top of that, you penalize Charles Leclerc 5 seconds. I don't see what... Because here's the thing. Excuse me. Is that he didn't gain that, as if anything, he lost advantage there, because going into that chicane there, before the start-finish straight, Sergio Perez wasn't going to be passing Charles Leclerc going into that chicane. Charles Leclerc outbroke himself. That's just as simple as that. You can clearly see it on a lot of the replays. And, and then he was able to keep it, but Sergio Perez was much closer than he was when he, right before the chicane. And then, Charles, with a good bit of driving, kind of lets the car drift out a little bit to not necessarily block, but just, keep Sergio behind him. And, then you penalize Charles so quickly after the race. It was almost immediate that they penalized him. Didn't give him a chance to, discuss like they did with Sergio last week. We had to wait several hours before we knew whether or not Sergio Perez won that race. Why is it that we had to wait? We only literally waited, 20 minutes, if that, to get a decision that Charles Leclerc cut the corner and gained an advantage. There was no talking to Charles Leclerc, no talking to Sergio Perez, no talking to Ferrari and looking at the data. It was immediately we're going to make the decision that you're getting a 5-second penalty. So not only does the 5-second penalty drop Charles back to third, but then it basically gives the championship to Max Verstappen, because then the FIA made the decision to issue full points in this race. Again, this goes back to the same thing I've been saying, that the FIA looks really, really bad when you can't even follow your own dang rules throughout a weekend. This is ridiculous that, it's in your rules. After Spa 2021, you guys made the decision that points were going to be issued in certain circumstances if the race only went 25% distance, or 50 to 75% distance, or 75 to, the full distance. You guys came up with that table. It wasn't like the fans, magically came up with this stupid rule. If you want to issue full points, go for it. Just list it in the rules. Hey, we're going to issue full points even if the race only goes 50%. But, the fact that you didn't even follow your own rules looks really, really horrible. And again, it's going to make a lot of people question whether Max Verstappen is the true champion. Now, granted, like I said, I think Max was going to win this championship regardless. Whether it was today or Austin or whatever the case may be, I thought he was going to still win the championship. But let's win it under the right circumstances. Let's not just, decide, we're going to issue full points and then we're going to penalize Charles Leclerc for, cutting the track and gaining an advantage when, if you look at the video, he didn't gain an advantage. If anything, he lost a lot there. It's totally mind-blowing what the FIA is doing and is literally just completely looking stupid more and more every single day. And I think this overshadows a pretty decent Japanese Grand Prix. I mean, Max was absolutely dominant throughout this race, but I think the weekend, without being in Japan for the last 3 years due to the pandemic, and now being back in Japan for the first time in 3 years, one, I think the fans deserved a full race here, not a 25 or 50% race. They deserved a full 100% race, especially with all they put up with this entire weekend. I think they deserved the full race, and that's why I think they need to get away from this 3 hour or 2 hour time limits that they put on certain races. But I think it would have just, then it makes sense to issue the full points here. But there's going to be a lot of people going into this 1 week break before we go to Austin, that are going to be saying, FIA, you look stupid. You guys are looking like you are favoring a certain driver by some of the decisions you are making. You need to stop, because otherwise people are going to have no more faith in you when it comes to Formula One and your decision making. Literally, the FIA and the stewards are going to kill this sport. It's not going to be Max Verstappen. This has nothing to do with him. He can only do what he can do. But it comes down to the ultimate decision makers of the Formula One community, and that's the stewards and the FIA. And if they want to continue making these stupid decisions, they are going to drive fans away quicker than you can say Formula One. It's a fact, and you can see it already on Twitter over the last year and a half. It's driving fans away for the, just the utter dumb decisions that the FIA is making. So, excuse me. So, guys, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below of the Japanese Grand Prix. On a grand scale of things, I would probably rate it a 2.5. Probably in that 2.5. Like I said, I would have much rather gotten the full race today. 2.5 out of 5 for me. Like I said, had it run the full, 100%, maybe a 3. I'm probably, I'm going to change it and I'm going to go a 2. Because I think FIA's decisions throughout this race weekend, no, we're going to go down all the way to a 1. Because of FIA's decisions throughout the weekend and, just some of the dumb decisions that they've made, this race really is going to have a shadow cast over it. And again, Max, through no fault of his own, is going to have a shadow over his second driver's championship. Unless he just wins it in such dominant fashion that, there's just no questioning that he would have won it. But, there's going to be a shadow over his championship and whether or not he truly deserved it this year. But, guys, let me know in the comment section down below what you guys rate this, the Japanese Grand Prix today. I rated a 1 out of 5. It really has missed the mark in a lot of areas for me, as we've talked about. But let me know in the comment section down below. If you're watching this on YouTube, let me know in the comment section down below. If you guys are listening to this on Spotify or Anchor, rate these podcasts for me. Rate it, 5 stars. If you guys are loving the Formula One podcast, rate it 5 stars for me. But go on YouTube and subscribe to my channel as well. We're not doing just the podcast there. Going to be doing some reaction videos later this week while we wait for basically a 2-week break before we go to Austin for the Austin GP. So we're going to be doing some more videos there. But guys, also, if you're on YouTube, slap a like on this video so this video gets out to more Formula One fans. And then also, guys, if you're on YouTube, subscribe if you guys are new for more daily and weekly Formula One content. If you guys are on Spotify or Anchor, follow my podcast to be notified when new episodes of the podcast come out. But guys, thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for watching this on my channel. It means the absolute world to me. But guys, for the American F1 fan and for the Final Lap Podcast, I'm Eric Ringel, signing off.